Hi guys, welcome to this video. This is another 40k Musings video, and this one is about 8th edition, which is incoming soon. If the rumours are to be believed, it's going to be about middle of June. So what I wanted to do is, there's a lot of videos coming out every day as the trickle of information is released by Games Workshop from other channels and that kind of thing, and I don't want to do that. Basically, I can't keep up with that, and honestly there's not really enough to talk about every time. So I'm just going to do this one video, and the next video I'll do regarding 8th edition itself will be when 8th edition actually comes out, and I'll probably do a full overview at that point. For the time being, this is just what's come out, the information and stuff, and kind of what's going on. So the first thing I was going to say is, what is your plan for 8th edition? Are you planning anything in particular? Have you got a new army in the works, or some kind of new build that you're hoping to be able to try out and that kind of thing that you didn't feel comfortable running before? I've actually got a secret project on the way, and I'm not going to reveal what it is, so I haven't actually told anyone this, but I'm actually doing a lot of painting at the moment. I'm trying to revamp something, so I'm looking forward to that. So hopefully should be done by the time 8th edition actually drops. But there we go. So I'm looking forward to it. So I wanted to actually talk about some of the information that's come out and kind of my thoughts on it. And a lot of people are going to disagree with me on some of these. They already have. But this is just my impressions of what's going on. So I'm going to have a few predictions here. It's all my opinion at the end of the day, but this is just how I see things going. And if you hear some noise in the background, sorry, that is my cat again. He likes to get involved in these videos. Okay, so the first major thing which springs to mind is there seems to be a lot of D6 weapons coming out. So where there was templates and flamer templates before and blast markers, that kind of thing, they've got rid of those and there's just dice now. So all these things are like D6 weapons, D3 weapons, that kind of thing. So what that basically means is it's going to be even more dice rolling than before. As we've seen from Twin Link, to get more shots, guard orders, there's going to be a lot more dice rolling around. And since everything can hurt everything else, there's going to be, well, that doesn't change so much the amount of shots, but there's no like wasted shots anymore. Everything can be used, which means weapons that may not bothered firing before can be fired. Combi weapons as well, you fire both modes if you want, so it's going to be a hell of a lot more dice rolling than before. And I suppose in a way that's kind of like action, so that is a representation, and there's a lot of tension in dice rolling. But I feel like it may get a bit ridiculous. If you've ever played Gorkamorka, fantastic game, lots of fun, but there's a crazy amount of rolling in that just to resolve a simple thing. You're just constantly rolling dice and stuff, and that's how the game works. It's just meant to be insane, but as actual like a regular game should function, it's not something you could deal with all the time. It's very, very clunky. I'm not saying 8th edition is going to go that far, but it's definitely certain that there's going to be a lot more dice rolling than there was before. So it's just something to be aware of. The thing with these D6 weapons, so the battle cannon, the flamer, that kind of thing, I feel like, well, we've got the Exorcist, okay, so we, as Sisters of Battle, we know what rolling a D6 is, and as I've said before, I'm not really a fan of that. I like the Exorcist, but I feel like it's way too random to be relied upon, and that's why I don't actually take them in my army anymore, purely because there's more efficient things out there. Even multiple Exorcists, I don't think it's actually worth it overall, unless you come up against, I don't know, Tyranids or something where lots of monstrous creatures. Then, so certain matchups exist slightly better, but for the most part it's not really worth taking them. And that's because they are so random. There's good chances that you won't roll very many shots, and then you can miss. And especially in 8th edition, where there's going to be hit modifiers, you're more likely to miss overall. Then you still got a wound, which is the same as before. for the most part, you're going to be wounding on the same as before, possibly worse. It depends how it works. So, you might actually be wounding on 3s, whereas before you were wounding on 2s, depending on how it works. So, it could be you're worse off in that sense. And then there's the saves, and because the way cover works, it's a +1. Because of the way the new APs seem to be working, we know that a las cannon, which was AP2, is a -3, and we also know an AP3 is a -2 to armor. So that actually means, like, Space Marines, for instance, get a 5-up armor save against battle cannons now. Okay, and we're just taking battle cannon as our prime example. But if you're in cover, you get a +1 to that. Okay, so 4-up. So it'd be the same as being in, like, a regular rune and that kind of thing. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a 50% chance to save everyone after you've gone through all those other modifiers. And if you've moved, -1 to hit might not be there for vehicles, but all these other hit modifiers and that kind of thing. You actually got worse chances of doing anything than you previously did before, and that was with the blast. I mean, how many people have played guard that and you've spoken to them, and they're happy with blast templates and that kind of thing because they had more chance of hitting? Now it's not going to happen because they've got to roll this dice and they have to roll to hit for them. And I think because of that, they're actually going to be less effective. So those kind of weapons in general are going to be much less effective than they were before. Okay, I'm going to go back to the battle cannons in a bit, so there's more to say on that. But swapping over to the Flamer now, a lot of people, when the new rules for the Flamer came out, were really happy, and they were like, how it's a huge boost, to the Flamer's effectiveness. And I honestly don't know what they're talking about, because it's nothing but a nerf if you actually look at it. It's actually severely downgraded. So let's actually look at it. So first off, your regular Flamer, which your Sister of Battle would use, your Space Marine would use. Okay, strength 4 as before, and it does D6 auto hits instead of the template. Now, that's okay. If you roll a 6, then you might be about average to what you could get before, but you're far more likely to roll less than that. Okay, and you might roll a 1 every time, and suddenly it's a bit pants. Okay, whereas before with a template you could cover entire units, so you could get above that 6. It wasn't random. It was based on your skill to get in positioning. It wasn't that difficult, to be fair, but you could usually get quite close, cover a bunch of people. The thing is, if you're rolling a d6, it purely takes that entire element of tactical play out of the game, because it's just completely random now. Okay, and I find it interesting that one of the problems people had with 7th edition and 6th edition before it was how many things were randomized and weren't based on player skill, and then this comes out and people seem happy about it. I just think that's a bit weird. Okay, now if you do roll a d6 and you roll well, all these things auto hit. So that is the same as the Flamer was before. It automatically hits. Okay. Another problem though. Okay, so you can't get beyond 6, so positioning doesn't matter. Even if you're at the maximum range away, 8 inches, you could still potentially get 6 hits, whereas before you might have got 1, 2, that kind of thing. So now there's no need to position yourself. You could stay at the maximum range and that kind of thing. So it doesn't even have that drawback it did before, which was getting really close to the enemy, and if you didn't kill them, you were probably going to get charged. You were right in their face, so you were exposed. You're going to be less exposed this time. Okay, but the other thing with it not being a template also means that you, as far as we can tell, I haven't said specifically, there might be a special rule in the Flamer loadout that says against this, but it would seem weird because they'd have to add it on every single Flamer style template weapon. So I'm not sure why they would do that and not just have a template. But it's a regular shooting attack. So what that means is you would need to have line of sight, from what we can tell. Now, yes, you did need line of sight before, but you could hit people out of line of sight. At this point, you need line of sight to make that shooting attack, so it might work differently. Okay. Now, another thing a lot of people have pointed out about the Flamer and blast templates in general, you can't hit multiple units with them anymore because it's a regular shooting attack. so you have to target a unit, and that's the only ones you can hurt with it. Okay, which is a shame, you know. What I think is particularly bad about it is that when there was templates and blast markers, it meant that people didn't have to. Well, no, it discouraged people from blocking up their models together in tiny little clumps. Okay, because if they did, they were in danger of getting hit multiple times. You know, and if you saw the enemy do that, you could pounce on them with your flamers or shoot blasts at them, capitalize on it. That's a good game mechanic. You know, it's a good balancing mechanic because it keeps them spread out. But if they're spread out, they're more likely to be charged or seen and shot at from other weapons. So it was a good balancing mechanic. And on top of that, it was harder for them to stay in cover if it was a particularly big unit, that kind of thing. Now there's none of that, so they can easily stand in cover, just completely bunch up and that kind of thing, and they're not going to get any protection against it. So, you know, it's a bit daft, okay? Now again, as it stands, unless there's another rule entry in there, which there may be, if there is, again, it seems a bit strange to me that they would do that instead of just keeping it in the main rule of the weapon. But as it stands, flamers don't ignore cover anymore, which they used to. Cover in 8th edition is a +1 to your save, even works in melee, as long as you didn't charge that turn. If you the defender, it would, but it's +1 to your save. Okay. So flamers, as it stands, don't ignore cover anymore. So that again is a drawback. And on top of that, they've lost all AP. Now, I like the modifier system over the binary system because it means if you have an AP, you know, it's going to have an effect regardless. The problem being with no AP on the flamer, it's gone from binary where sometimes they would get a save or they wouldn't get a save in certain cases to the fact that they will now just always get a save. So if you factor that in with the D6 roll, the fact that they can hide themselves in cover very easily, and the fact that you can't hit multiple units, this is a massive nerf for how flamers work. Okay, and there's loads of people out there who are saying, well, you know, that's fine. You can target single model units, more effective against a single model. Okay, but this is supposed to be a flamethrower. It's supposed to be a mass anti-infantry clearing weapon. That's what it's designed for, is to just like burn out entire swathes of people entrenched in cover and that kind of thing. You know, not multiple hit a single model. It's daft. It changes, you know, it doesn't make sense. It kind of changes the role of what a flamer is, you know. And I feel like they've lost a lot there just to get rid of the templates. And one has to ask why they got rid of templates and blasts in the first place. And according to the articles, from what we can infer from that, it's because there may have been disputes between people on how many people the template covered, or maybe it's a bit wonky to use. I've never personally had that problem. I don't think I've ever had an argument or seen an argument over how many people are under a blast template. But again, the people who are testing the game for them are particularly hardcore tournament folk in the US. So maybe that stuff came up all the time there. That's fine. But I do feel like they've to change the game for that tiny little reason, they've lost a lot. And there probably were better ways of making the flamer effective than this. So, yeah, I don't think that's a good change. It's fine, however, if the flamer is pointed appropriately. However, considering at the moment it's like 5 points, I mean, we don't know how much everything's going to be, so in relation to that. So say, proportionately to the current system, a flamer in the updated one could, if it's more than 2 points, if it was the equivalent of more than 2 points in the current system, I wouldn't bother taking one. Because honestly, you're better off with a bolt gun, because at least you're getting more shots at longer range, you know, and, you know, honestly, you're better off than just rolling at 1 or a 2 anyway, in my opinion. You lose too much for it. So that's just my thoughts on the flamer, okay? But as I said about hitting one model repeatedly, okay, it sounds cool, but it just kind of takes it away a little bit from what it's designed for, and it pushes the game from a cinematic experience into a more gamey experience. And if you don't know what I mean by gamey, it's where mechanics in a video game or a tabletop game or anything like that, a mechanic exists because it needs to for the game to function. Or it's something that just seems completely out of place. So, say in a video game, eating a big haunch of meat, just eating a plate of meat restores your health. Okay, it makes no real sense. Okay, it's a very gamey thing, and if it's a particularly realistic game, I can't even think of one where that would happen. But I don't know. Say it was in the middle of Battlefield or something where it's super realistic graphics and stuff, and you go around shooting people and that kind of thing, and then you just run up, you've lost some health, you've been shot several times, you run up and eat some meat, and suddenly you feel better. That's what I'm kind of mean. It's like this weird gamey mechanic, because that needs to be there, but because it's that weird abstract thing, it's something that takes you out the experience. Okay, and generally speaking, in game design terms, you want to kind of limit that if you can, or make it more acceptable to the world you're in. And this is just something that goes that way a little bit. So just my opinion on the flamer thing, anyway. But so going back to the battle cannon in particular, on the Lemon Russ. Okay, so I just kind of wanted to say about the vehicles, right? So the weapon will be less effective, as we know, or as I reckon, because you roll on that thing, you could roll badly, you could roll well, but again, after all the things been resolved, I honestly think it's not going to do as well as it would currently. Okay, but as we've seen from the rules of vehicles are going to be way more survivable in general, and the reason for this is because they have multiple wounds and an armor save. And assuming cover still works the same way, a lot of the time they will get that armor save against most of the weapons, and every other weapon that people is using to kill them also has this random d6 things for wounds, or they got modifiers to hit and that kind of thing. So they're going to hit less often. They're going to do less damage in general, because before, when you got a penetrating hit, you would stun it, so it would snap fire and that kind of thing, or you'd take off a hull point, obviously, or you could destroy a weapon or immobilize it and that kind of thing and directly affect it in one go. Okay, now they do lose effectiveness as it goes down, but it might be a point of ballistic skill or something like that. And obviously, with its weapon already being so random, losing something in ballistic skill is just going to make it even worse. But it's you're not crippling the tank in the same way, because it still can fire that weapon. It's not losing the weapon. Now, some vehicles might lose weapons, or, I don't know, be immobilized, that kind of thing, as they are now. But I honestly don't see that happening as much as the stats just dropping from what we've seen. So, yeah, it does mean that the vehicle will still be quite effective overall. So, a comparison between the vehicles and the infantry. Infantry... it's kind of the same thing. So if an infantry unit takes hits, it loses effectiveness because you're taking off the models, so those models can't shoot anymore because they're dying, that kind of thing. So you're losing firepower. The vehicles, it's the same thing, but they only lose it gradually because there's certain thresholds they have to meet first. So that means the vehicles long term are more efficient, because they're taking the hits, but they're not going to lose it. It's the same as monstrous creatures in 7th edition. Even on one wound, they're just as effective at full health. They don't lose any potency. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. And I honestly think, to start with, in particular, we're going to see a lot of vehicles in 8th edition when it comes out. But I do think in the long term, provided everything, again, is appropriately pointed, point costs, that kind of thing, and it seriously depends on point cost a lot. But I do think eventually infantry will take over vehicles. And the reason I'm predicting this is because you'll be able to get more weapons on the infantry, which means more chances on those d6, as more effective at killing them. You'll get more firepower at the end of the day, and that will affect the vehicles as well, because you could effectively ignore the vehicle if it's a tank. Maybe it can ram you, but honestly, I think for the most part you will be able to ignore most of the vehicles because they won't be doing that much damage. And I would liken this to flyers in 7th and 6th edition, mainly 7th. I honestly don't think flyers, any of the flyers in 40k as it stands, are that potent in terms of actually doing damage. They're hard to kill, but I mean, if you've seen my dealing with flies video, for the most part you can safely ignore flies. They're not actually that potent at killing. There's way more dangerous things on the table. And I think it's going to be the same story here. Judging from these reveals, I don't think the vehicles are going to do that much on their own. So I think for the most part they'll be able to be ignored, and it's the infantry that are going to take over eventually. So that's my predictions. So first it'll be vehicles while people are getting used to it, and they'll be very hard to deal with and that kind of thing. And then it'll swap to the infantry. Now, obviously, as I said, depends on point costs, depends on the kind of missions, it depends what vehicles can do over infantry and that kind of thing. But that's what I'm predicting for now. Okay. So the other thing that came out that I wanted to talk about was characters. And if you've seen it, characters can no longer join units. Now, obviously with Sisters of Battle, there's a lot of character joining units, that kind of thing. Which is pretty crucial. It's a fairly crucial mechanic to getting some potency out in Sisters. I'm perfectly happy for this to change, because, you know, it's not actually changing that much, because they now have an aura effect around them. It's like a bubble of range, and they'll have different effects depending on what the character is, that kind of thing. Okay, now one drawback I would say with this is that it means that most of the characters, unless they're just a complete beat stick, well, even then, most of the characters are going to be more alike. So it actually means a lot of the characters are going to be very, very similar, because they'll have similar effects. They'll all have this bubble. They'll all be used in a similar way. Or they're a beat stick and they don't have any benefits, but then it's just one or the other, you know. And it could potentially be samey because there's a lot of characters in the game. So I think that could be a drawback. But the good thing about having characters outside is that you can take one priest, say, and he would affect several units instead of just one. Okay, now yes, he's more exposed, but you know, if they're pointed again, we don't know the points for anything, and that's the main variable we don't know about yet. So it could perfectly be balanced. So I'm not going to say it's not balanced yet or anything like that, because we don't know. But it does mean that you can take less and use those points for other things, potentially. Unless they're more expensive, but I doubt it. So that's something about the characters. Now the rules for characters is if they have less than 10 wounds, they cannot be targeted by shooting unless they're the closest model to the firing unit. And the reasons for this are obvious, is because otherwise someone would just fire a missile right in their face, they die immediately, completely exposed, that kind of thing. I would say that this is early days, so it's hard to tell, but this is where the positioning kind of thing will come in. I honestly think that 8th edition is going to revolve around many, many units marching in very tight formations. There's various reasons for this from the revealed things. Again, there's no templates or blasts, so why not? And I think they all get the benefits from an independent character that way. And they're going to be just marching up, and the character will be hidden in the middle, that kind of thing, like bubble wraps. So it's going to be bubble wrap everywhere. Okay, everything's going to be doing it because they need to protect these characters, that kind of thing. But it really does put some interesting things into how drop pods are going to work, because, you know, they could be potentially very, very good if they can get close to a character, that kind of thing. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see where that goes. One thing I wanted to say about this is, again, it's a little bit gamey in many ways, because it seems strange that you couldn't pick out this character. And the example they give, well, the reasoning behind this they give in the article, is that with the swirl of the battlefield, all these people moving around in different directions, and all this stuff going on, all these gunshots and stuff, it'd be very difficult to pick out someone amongst that crowd. That's perfectly reasonable explanation. But then you've got people like Gilliman, okay? He's a freaking giant. It's pretty obvious where he is. He's got lots of like fancy pageantry and all that kind of thing. You know, and he's got less than 10 wounds, so he's got this rule as well, okay? I'm pretty sure you should be able to pick him out sooner than the other ones, at least, at a further distance, okay? Now, let's just say you can't. Let's just say he's really good at hiding amongst the crowd and you can't do it, even though he's really big, okay? Well, he's the same size, if not bigger, as a dreadnought. Will a dreadnought be able to have this? No, because it won't have the keyword, okay? It's very unlikely that a dreadnought will have this rule of protection as well, okay? But then, again, it's super gamey because realistically, and realistically I mean on the tabletop, the models are essentially the same size. I think a dreadnought's slightly shorter, but for some reason you can't see one, but you can see the other. Do you see what I mean? It's this really strange kind of precedent it brings up, and it's just a thing again where the game mechanics need to work that way, because otherwise these characters are going to die, you know. And that raises the question again, so why not just let them hide in a unit as always? Because it's kind of a lateral move they've done. So they've taken away the strategies of unit combinations and that kind of thing, and like positioning your independent character in a unit so he doesn't get shot from different directions and that kind of thing, and capitalizing on an enemy who's put their independent character at the back, so you go around the back and shoot that guy first, that kind of thing. They've got rid of that to position him outside the unit, so you're positioning other units so they're always the closest one. And yeah, as I say, it's super gamey, but it seems like an unnecessary change to me in a lot of ways, okay? And again, the reasoning for this change is that Death Stars was such a big problem, okay? Here's my thoughts on that. So, Death Stars were a major part of the game, and they have been for a long time, okay? But that's one strategy, okay? Good or bad, it's the way the game worked. It was like combos, okay? And if you've ever played X-Wing miniatures, combos are the name of that game, okay? Death Stars kinda can work occasionally in that. It's a lot more balanced, but for the most part, it's about creating combinations, and there'll still be some combinations, but they're kind of moving away from that type of combinations to another. So comboing units is not a bad thing. Okay, combining abilities to get more benefits is not a bad thing. It's a good strategy. You know, maybe they don't want that in their game anymore, in which case fair enough. But again, it's going to mean it's a very, very different kind of feel, a very different kind of playing game if that's the case. I don't think it is, but it's just a possibility. So before I get too far off track on this, but what I mean is, so some Death Stars were bad, okay? It's unarguable, you know, some Death Stars were broken, okay? This and the flame thing, and you know, everything I've mentioned so far, like the templates and stuff and the arguments over that, I feel like this is a danger of getting hardcore tournament players to test your game. And it seems like Games Workshop, I'm just inferring this from the article, but it seems like Games Workshop are literally just listening to them. They aren't really thinking it through for themselves. It's almost like they're coming up with the idea, throwing it out to the tourney players, and whatever info they get back, whatever feedback they get, they're just going, right, that's what we'll do. Okay. Okay, not going too far off topic. If you've ever played Street Fighter V, okay, Street Fighter V was a game built from the ground up with the hardcore tournament setting in mind, okay, and it's built to appease those people, okay, and satisfy them and appeal to them and that kind of thing, and it worked in that sense. It was brilliant for them. However, for the most part, most people would consider that Street Fighter V was a big failure because they completely neglected our casual audience, that kind of thing. So there was nothing there for them because they didn't take the time to address their needs or like their ideas and that kind of thing. And it's a danger that can happen here as well. And the reason it's dangerous is because tournament players in particular, and the ones they're going to are the ones who've done like the ITC and that kind of thing, they have a specific meta, okay? Which means they have a specific way of playing the game, and you can guarantee they were playing the most hardcore lists they possibly could. You know, your net list kind of thing, that kind of thing, and that's why the ITC was created to like impose restrictions on that kind of thing and all that kind of thing. Okay. So they actually have a very narrow view. I mean, obviously not all of them, but for the most part, they can have a very narrow view of how the game functions in its whole, in its entirety, because they've not done that. They've played the hardcore lists and that kind of thing, so they don't know beyond that. They have specific expectations going into a game on how the game functions, and it's not necessarily the true way. Okay, for example, okay, so in the Imperial Guard little rundown we got, there was all this sort of mentions about, and even the Chaos one, in fact, there's mentions about how, oh yeah, Chaos Space Marines are back, because no one ever used them, that kind of thing. I know a few people who used Chaos Space Marines, especially in the big 20-man blob, and they were pretty cheap for a lot of bolters. Tough little unit, Some weaknesses, but if you learnt to use them, they were very effective. Okay, so, yeah, better example in the Imperial Guard one. It's like, yeah, everyone will want their Rough Riders back, okay? Now, if you see my older videos, I've mentioned it several times before, Rough Riders were one of my favourite units, or are one of my favourite units in the game. And the reason they are is because they're freaking amazing, okay? Rough Riders had a very specific niche, and they were hard to use, but if you used them, they could have a massive effect on the game, and they were appropriately costed. They were cheap, that kind of thing. Now, if someone's coming in and saying, well, Rough Riders were terrible, no one used them, and then suddenly they decide to change it so everyone does use them, or there's a reason to take them, they'll get a massive power boost. Now, that's fine, but it also, it implies a slight ignorance to the full potential of that unit previously. Okay? Now, I don't mind because units change all the time with new codexes and that kind of thing. But again, it kind of highlights this narrow, potentially narrow thinking. I'm not saying this is the case, by the way. This is just a danger that could happen from this. Okay? So it's stuff like that, that kind of makes me wonder, like these decisions, that's where it seems to me like they're coming from, and I feel like it could potentially lose some of its character because of that in the game. Okay, yes, I'd like to see more varied units, but are we actually going to see more varied units, or are we just going to swap what's powerful now for other things that are powerful? Which is a possibility. We don't know. I mean, there's always going to be some things that are more powerful than others. So, it could happen. So last thing I want to say about this aspect is, it seems like in 8th edition, there's going to be a lot more death. So, all these dice getting chucked out, all the way the rapid fire and twin linked works and all this kind of thing, and the first rank fire, second rank fire orders, that kind of thing. It's going to be dice everywhere, okay? and there's going to be a lot of people taking hits and dying, infantry just dying in droves and that kind of thing, even though the weapons will be less effective. And this is speeding the game up, okay? Now, if you've invested time and effort and money into building and painting your guys, already people complain that their models die too fast, you know, they get taken off, especially if they're like cheap troops and stuff like that. Or they're weak defensively, say Howling Banshees for Eldar or something, okay? People just end up taking them off the table as soon as they put them on, and that's not really fun for anyone in many ways. I mean, obviously you need to take losses or the game doesn't work, unless you're Necrons, but, you know, it should have some kind of, at least some table time, unless they're targeted first, and then you've got everything else and that kind of thing. It needs an almost like a ratio, the time spent on the table to the damage, you know. And I feel like, as it stands, from what we're seeing, things are going to die a lot quicker overall, and it'll speed the games up, which, you know, could be fun. It's going to be crazy, that kind of thing. But I wonder if this is a result of tournament testing as well, where they're more likely to see the crazy super-powered Death Star-y units, the D-strength weapons and that kind of thing, just blasting units off the table simply, the triple Riptide wings and all that kind of thing, you know, just demolishing entire units in one turn so people are removing models. That probably means they're more used to huge amounts of models getting removed very, very quickly in a game. Okay, and if they're kind of used to that, then obviously they wouldn't question it if the next edition has that same mechanic across everything, because they're expecting that. So that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that because they have a meta viewpoint that they're used to, there's a very good chance that the game is going to change in a lot of ways that it doesn't really need to, because it's got to fit this new idea that, you know, unless they are putting their own input in, and I hope they are. Games Workshop this is. I hope they are, but, you know, and I'm happy to be completely wrong on this, but it's just something I think people need to be aware of going in. Okay, so that is pretty much it. If it seems like I'm being super negative on this, I'm not. I'm just listing my thoughts going into it, and as I said, this is the only video I'm going to make on this until it actually comes out. But being critical doesn't necessarily mean that I don't like it. In fact, I'm really looking forward to 8th edition, because as far as I was concerned, 7th edition had got very, very boring and stale for me. Most of the people in the club had got bored of it. We'd all kind of moved to X-Wing and other game systems and that kind of thing. So I in particular am very much looking forward to it, because I'd lost all passion for 40k. But since the 8th edition reveals drip feeds, I've been painting like crazy, you know, getting this secret project up and running. So I'm really looking forward to 8th edition and what it'll bring. And no matter what happens, you know, I'm going to have to adapt to it, and I'm pretty sure I'll be able to. So I will be releasing videos to help you guys, hopefully, if I can. I have no idea if I'll be any good at it, but I'll try. I'm going to help you guys as best I can to acclimatise to 8th edition as well. And that's basically it for my thoughts on 8th edition at the moment. So if you like this video, please remember to click like below. It really helps me out. Don't forget to comment. I want to know your feedback on 8th, what are your thoughts, what you're looking forward to, what you're dreading, that kind of thing. Do you think I'm talking crap? That's perfectly fine. Go ahead and tell me, you know. If you have any questions, put them below, and I will answer them as soon as I can. And don't forget to subscribe if you want tactical videos, or any other videos like this. Just let me know. Alright, thanks for watching. See you next time.